Garron Whitlow was already regretting everything by the time the shuttle docked with the orbital medical research vessel the Yon 9. The docking ring groaned under the pressure shift, and a dull clang echoed up through the floor of the passenger cabin. He pressed a hand to the fresh bandage wrapped around his upper arm. Blood had seeped through the gauze. Not a good sign. The makeshift dressing he'd applied during the planetary survey wasn't holding well, but it had kept him conscious long enough to get off the surface. That was something. The cabin hissed open, revealing a corridor washed in pale lavender light. A tall figure stepped forward 8 feet tall, skin like moss-covered stone, and a narrow, angular face that looked permanently skeptical. "I am Dr. Kael," the alien said. "You are the injured human." Garron nodded, gritting his teeth as he stood. "Yeah, Garron Whitlow. Environmental engineer, Survey Team 3. Got snagged on a metal shard during the site collapse." Kael gestured for him to follow. "You were bleeding. Thanks for noticing." The walk to the medbay was short, but every step jostled his wound. The corridor pulsed with quiet hums and shifting light as if the station itself breathed in sync with its occupants. Kael didn't wait or slow, and Garron didn't ask. By the time they reached the medical bay, he was pale and sweating. Kael pointed to a diagnostic table. "Lie down." Garron obeyed, grunting as he eased himself onto the cold surface. Kael's thin fingers hovered over a wall panel, and a holographic display flared to life. Without a word, Kael scanned Garron's arm. The bandage was peeled away with surgical precision. Kael recoiled slightly. "Is that rust?" Kael asked, blinking his translucent eyes. "Yeah, probably. The metal was part of an old survey drone. Collapsed right into me." Kael tilted his head. "There is oxidized ferrous material embedded in the dermis. Your blood is reacting. That is unclean. Well, welcome to Earth Tech. Sometimes we bleed for our progress." Garron gave a weak attempt at a grin, but it faltered. Kael turned back to the console, fingers tapping rapidly. "I will prepare the decontamination gel and tissue regenerator. You will need a nerve duller and likely a blood supplement." "I'm okay without the nerve duller." Kael stopped moving. "That is not recommended." Garron shrugged with his good shoulder. "I've had worse. Just get the rust out." Kael's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened. "Your species has a troubling relationship with pain. Only when it gets in the way." Kael began the decontamination procedure. The gel stung like fire ants dipped in vinegar. Garron hissed, but didn't flinch. Kael watched every twitch of muscle. "You did not seek immediate treatment," Kael said. "Wasn't an option. The shuttle site was 2 kilometers uphill. Had to patch myself up and move." Kael blinked again. "You used adhesive strips. Duct tape." "Explain." Garron flexed his fingers and winced. "Wrapped it tight, kept the bleeding down. It's not a miracle cure, but it works in a pinch." Kael stared at him. "That is not a medical device." "No, but it sticks, even in rain. That's good enough when you're bleeding out in a crater." Kael made a low humming noise. "Your species treats trauma with household tools and optimism." "It's not optimism. It's desperation," with a smile. Kael took a long moment before responding. "I will need to extract the embedded metal. This may cause further damage." "Do it." The extraction was slow and painful. Garron bit down on a rubber mouthpiece and stayed still. Kael worked methodically, pulling each twisted fragment from the wound. Garron's muscles clenched with each tug, but he didn't cry out. Sweat dripped from his brow onto the table. When it was done, Kael held up the largest shard. This was buried near a major nerve cluster. A centimeter deeper, and you would have lost function in your hand. "Close one." Kael looked at him. "Why do you not react more strongly to pain? Your vitals suggest acute discomfort." "I react, just not in ways that waste energy." Kael deposited the shard into a containment tray, then began sealing the wound with tissue regenerator foam. "You will need antibiotics and daily wound checks. You should not have moved with such an injury." "Noted." Kael paused, then added, "You should rest here." Garron sat up slowly. "Can't. I've got a debrief in 2 hours. We lost 6 drones and half our atmospheric data. You are still bleeding internally in minor tissues. You are not stable." "I'll be careful." Kael took a long breath. "You are not careful. You are profoundly reckless. Comes with the job." Kael did not understand, and didn't pretend to. Instead, he handed Garron a tube of synthetic skin wrap and another roll of sterile tape. "This is not duct tape," Kael said. "Use it." Garron took the supplies, nodding. "Thanks, document." Kael watched him go with unreadable eyes. 2 days later, Garron was back in the med bay. The wound had reopened during a vibration test in the lab. The bleeding had soaked through his sleeve again. I told you to rest, Kael said, looking at the stained fabric. It was controlled movement. Nothing strenuous. You fell off a vibration platform. It tipped. Not my fault. Kael sighed, an actual sigh filtered through his throat folds. Remove your shirt. Garron did, revealing the tape hybrid bandage he'd made himself. Kael blinked. You used duct tape again. I ran out of the other stuff. That was 2 days' supply. I gave some to Helen. She cut her palm on a specimen container. Kael stared at him. You redistributed sterile medical supplies to another injured crew member without consulting me. She needed it. I had tape. Kael pinched the bridge of his elongated nose. I am going to request a human medical liaison. You already have one. Me. That is not comforting. Kael cleaned the wound again. This time, he muttered while doing it. You are not a physician. You are not trained. Your arm is inflamed. Yet you persist in applying adhesives and smiling. Garron exhaled slowly. We adapt. That's our thing. Kael turned and opened a drawer. Then adapt to doing as you're told. He handed Garron a pressure sleeve, a bottle of pills, and a printed instruction sheet. Take these. Follow the instructions. Return in 48 hours. Garron nodded. Understood. Kael added, if you use tape again, I will report you to your fleet commander. Garron saluted with his good arm. Aye, Doctor. Kael didn't return the gesture. He simply turned back to his console, muttering again. Later that week, the station experienced a partial power failure. Garron was called to assist in stabilizing the environmental systems. The wound had mostly closed, but deep tissue still ached. He moved carefully, climbing through access ducts and rerouting coolant lines. An hour into the repair, a coolant pipe burst, slashing his leg. He cursed, tore off part of his undershirt, and wrapped it tight. No medical supplies on hand. He limped back to the main corridor, where Kael nearly ran into him. You were leaking again. It's not as bad as last time. Kael scanned the wound. You tore muscle. You are going to the med bay. Now. Garron didn't argue. He couldn't. His leg throbbed with each step. Back on the table, Kael worked quickly. This time, he didn't bother to comment on the shirt tourniquet. He simply treated the wound, injected pain blockers, and applied proper dressings. You are collecting injuries, Kael said flatly. Just unlucky week. Your species does not fear damage. We do. We just deal with it differently. Kael paused. I do not understand your tolerance. You don't have to. Just help me patch up so I can get back out there. Kael finished the dressing and looked him in the eye. You are not allowed to leave until I clear you. Garron nodded. Fair. Kael tapped his console. I will monitor your recovery personally. Do I get a gold star for that? Kael looked at him. What is a gold star? Garron grinned faintly. It means I did good. Kael thought about that. You did not do good. You survived. That is not the same. Garron leaned back against the table. Sometimes it is. Kael said nothing. By the end of the week, Garron's leg was healing properly. The arm wound had closed, though stiffness lingered. Kael checked him twice daily, often in silence. But he stopped gasping at the sight of makeshift dressings. He even handed Garron a roll of medical-grade adhesive strips with a note that simply read, not duct tape. Use wisely. Kael still didn't understand humans, but he was beginning to accept that survival, for them, often came with a grin and a roll of tape. Kael stood motionless at the edge of the hydroponics bay, arms clasped behind his back, watching Garron attempt to lift a 50-kilogram pump with one leg braced against the floor and the other wobbling like a sedated jellyfish. You are forbidden from lifting heavy equipment, Kael said. Technically, I'm not lifting, Garron countered, grunting as he used his elbow to wedge the pump into a maintenance hatch. I'm guiding it. You are guiding it with your spine, which is strong. Mostly. Kael advanced, his long fingers splaying in agitation. The dermal regeneration is incomplete. Your leg support tissue has not stabilized. If you continue to exert pressure, Garron twisted the pump into place with a final shove. Then I'll limp artistically. You will rupture the semi-healed myofibrils. Only if I misstep. You just did. Garron backed away and leaned against the hatch frame. All right. Fine. I'll sit. Temporarily. Kael tilted his head. Your definition of rest appears to include heavy lifting and sarcastic evasion. Rest is a spectrum, Garron said, lowering himself to a seated position on a bundle of coiled tubing. Besides, I can't exactly take a week off. The water filtration loop's acting up, and we've got algae blooms in the oxygen tanks. Kael crouched beside him, scanning the leg with a portable monitor. You have inflammation in the anterior bundle. Again, it's a persistent little thing. It is aggravated by movement. I noticed. Kael stood and walked to a nearby console, muttering in his native tongue, which sounded like someone rearranging pebbles in a metal bowl. A moment later, he returned holding a thin, flexible brace. This will restrict your lower leg motion and reinforce the joint. It is not a license to continue self-endangerment. Garron accepted the brace and began strapping it on. You know, if you keep saving me, people are going to talk. I am not saving you. I am prolonging your regrettable decision-making. You say that like it's a bad thing. Kael turned to leave but paused. There is an inspection tomorrow. You will not be present. Actually, I'm coordinating it. No, yes. I will override your clearance. Then I'll sneak in through the coolant vents. Kael stared. You have done this before. Twice. Kael rubbed his forehead. Humans are a logistical nightmare. You say that like it's a revelation. Kael left without another word, the door closing with a hiss behind him. Garron adjusted the brace, tested his weight, and winced. It held. Mostly. The next day arrived cooler and quieter than usual. Inspection meant most of the crew wore their formal uniforms except Garron, who emerged from the maintenance corridor in grease-streaked overalls and a limp in his step. Kael intercepted him before he reached the central observation deck. You are not cleared for mobility. I'm moving very responsibly. You are limping and carrying a toolkit. It's a small toolkit. Kael extended a hand. Give it to me. You're going to throw it into space. No, I am going to hide it from you. Garron handed over the kit reluctantly. You know this is deeply undiplomatic. Your osteostructure thanks me. The inspection proceeded with all the awkward ceremony of a high school play performed underwater. The visiting dignitaries from the Valaria Accord, a crystalline species with the social flexibility of granite, had little interest in human maintenance reports. One of them, a multifaceted being named Atres, examined Garron's limp with a glimmer of alarm. Is that damage? Atres asked, his voice chiming like wind against glass. Old injury, Garron said, shifting his weight. Mostly stable. You should be in cryogenic recovery. Bit extreme for a bruised leg. Atres turned to Kael. Why is this human not in stasis? Because he refused. Atres looked back at Garron. And that was permitted? Garron shrugged. I'm still functional. That's what counts. Atres' crystalline ridges vibrated. That is biologically reckless. Kael nodded. Yes. The rest of the tour was uneventful until the dignitaries reached the filtration chamber and a shrill alarm began to pulse. The chamber lights flickered, then dimmed. Pressure fluctuation, Garron muttered. You are not moving, Kael said, stepping in front of him. I know the system. You are injured. I'm also the only one who can recalibrate those flow regulators without triggering a full purge. Kael hesitated. Garron limped around him. The filtration chamber was filled with a thick mist from condensation ruptures. Garron ducked under a dripping conduit, wiping moisture from his goggles. The pressure gauges were fluctuating wildly. He opened the panel and found the release valve jammed with a crystallized calcium deposit. He fished a screwdriver from his pocket. One of the Valari dignitaries peered in from the hallway. Should he be doing that? Kael exhaled. Apparently. Garron chipped at the deposit carefully. A fragment snapped off, slicing into his knuckle. Blood welled instantly. You are bleeding again, Kael said from behind. Yeah, but I've got gloves this time. Garron wrapped the knuckle in a bit of cloth torn from his sleeve. No tape. See. Progress. Kael leaned in. You cannot continue managing crises by leaking bodily fluids. Garron adjusted the valve and the pressure stabilized. The alarm went silent. Worked, though. Back in the corridor, Atres stared at Garron's red-streaked glove. Your kind engages in manual repairs while actively hemorrhaging? Only when we're in a hurry. Atres's crystalline ridges fluttered. You are not a species. You are a hazard. Kael looked at Garron. He is not wrong. That night, Garron sat in the ship's mess hall, leg propped on a crate, hand bandaged tightly. Kael stood nearby, scanning him again. No infection, Kael said. Yet. See? Not so reckless. You are a statistical anomaly. I am unsure how you have not expired from general negligence. Luck. and a high pain threshold. Kael pulled up a stool. You are aware that your approach to survival is neither sustainable nor replicable. Absolutely. Then why continue? Garron leaned back. Because things break, and someone has to fix them. I'd rather be the one bleeding on a pipe than the one waiting for someone else to show up. Kael stared at him for a long moment. You prioritize function over preservation. Yep. That is not survival. That is defiance. Close enough. Kael stood. You will report to me in the morning for a full scan. You going to confiscate my gloves too? If they are blood-soaked, yes. As Kael turned to leave, he paused. You will also receive a tetanus booster. Already had one. You will receive another. Garron grinned. Can't argue with that. Kael walked away, muttering something about metal fragments and fools. Behind him, Garron flexed his bandaged hand and winced. The pain was sharp, but it faded. He'd had worse. He probably would again. But for now, things worked. The systems hummed. The station held. And Kael, alien doctor and reluctant guardian, hadn't thrown him out of an airlock yet. That counted as a win. The hydroponics bay was unusually quiet for second cycle. Most of the crew had rotated out after the filtration scare, and a scheduled nutrient recalibration had cleared the area of non-essential personnel. The humidity clung to every surface, and faint traces of chlorophyll and ozone drifted through the air vents. Kael stood beside one of the nutrient tanks, arms folded, watching Garron hobble through the rows of mosh trays with a testing wand and a small sample kit. The human's gait was uneven but determined, his injured leg braced and wrapped tightly. His hand, still healing, was covered in a thin polymer glove that had already begun fraying at the wrist. You are exceeding your authorized range, Kael said without raising his voice. I'm walking between trays. Slowly, Garron said, tapping a leaf and watching the readout flicker. This one's nitrogen deficient. Probably a valve clog. You are not cleared for diagnostic surveys. I'm not using ladders. That was the condition, remember? Kael stepped forward, eyes narrowing. That was not the only condition. I'm not lifting anything either. You are standing, unsupported, for extended periods, which is technically not against your instructions. Kael exhaled and pulled out his portable scanner. Your blood pressure is elevated. You are dehydrated, and your brace is misaligned. Garron examined the sample under the handheld scope. It slipped when I crouched. You should not be crouching. There was a leaf blockage. Kael tapped a series of commands into the scanner. You are impervious to guidance. I prefer the term selectively cooperative. Kael's voice took on a quieter tone. You are pushing past recovery again. There is no urgent emergency in this section. Why are you here? Garron didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the sample vial and packed it away. Because I don't like sitting still. And because the last time we ignored a small imbalance, we lost a third of our oxygen yield. Kael's gaze lingered on him. You are not responsible for every system on this vessel. Maybe not, but I understand this one better than most. And it doesn't maintain itself. Kael held out a hydration pack. Drink this. Slowly. Garron took it without protest and sipped. Tastes like minerals and regret. Electrolytes and stabilizers. You require them. Garron sat on a crate, stretching his leg out with a restrained groan. I'll take a 10-minute break. Will that satisfy your medical instincts? For now. Kael scanned his leg again, adjusting the brace manually. You have micro-ears in the surrounding tissue. If you continue this pattern, the damage will compound. I'm not planning to run laps. You are not planning anything. You are responding to every minor imbalance as if it is a combat alert. Garron looked away. What happens if I don't? We've got 3 Volari delegates still on board, half the crew on rotation, and 2 backup engineers who can't tell a nutrient valve from a thermocoupler. Kael didn't respond immediately. He examined the brace alignment and applied a polymer seal along the seam. I have reinforced it. You will still need to keep weight off the leg for at least another cycle. Noted. Kael stood, returning the scanner to his satchel. You do not rest unless forced to. I don't rest well. That is not the same as not needing it. Garron leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. I'll stay here. Let the chlorophyll do its thing. Kael nodded and stepped away, returning to his own console. For a time, the only sounds were the soft hiss of nutrient misters and the muted beeping of diagnostic tools. An hour later, Garron was still on the crate, but now leaning forward, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. Kael approached again. You have not moved. Trying your method. Sitting. Observing. And it's boring as hell. Kael tilted his head. Does inactivity distress you? I think better when I'm doing something with my hands. Sitting still feels like waiting for something to go wrong. Kael considered this. You equate stillness with vulnerability. Garron gave a faint nod. Too many close calls. You start assuming motion is safety. Kael sat down across from him, folding his long limbs neatly. Your species is biologically adaptable, but psychologically volatile. We're not wired for calm. Not all of us, anyway. Kael looked at him for a moment, then opened the scanner again. Your heart rate has stabilized. Hydration improved. Blood pressure lowering. Garron raised an eyebrow. So sitting works? For now. A chime interrupted them. The hydroponics bay door opened and a small figure stepped through. It was a Xerxes technician, no taller than Garron's waist, covered in short plum-colored fur, carrying a tangled mess of tubing in one clawed hand. System 6 has a blockage, the Xerxes said. Algae clumps in the primary feed. Kael turned to Garron. You will not respond. I didn't say anything. You were about to. The Xerxes offered the tubing. We require someone who understands the flush sequence. Kael held up a hand. No. He is under restriction. Garron stood, slowly. I can talk them through it. No, I won't touch anything. Kael looked at the Xerxes. He will instruct. Verbally. The Xerxes blinked with both sets of eyes. Acceptable. Garron limped to the nearby console and gestured for the Xerxes to lay out the tubing. All right. First, you're going to need to isolate the feeder circuit. See the green conduit there? Disconnect the upper latch, not the lower. Otherwise, you'll trigger a backflow. The Xerxes chirped and began working. Garron explained each step with short, clear directions, occasionally pointing, but never moving more than a few centimeters. Kael watched the interaction carefully, but made no effort to intervene. After 20 minutes, the blockage was cleared and the system resumed normal flow. The Xerxes bowed slightly. Thank you, Garron of Earth. Anytime. The Xerxes left, tubing coiled neatly. Kael looked at Garron. You demonstrated restraint. I can be taught. Kael nodded once. You are still overextended. You will report for a scan at end of cycle. Agreed. They returned to their seats. Garron leaned back again. You know, this was almost peaceful. Almost. There weren't any explosions. I prefer it that way. Garron chuckled. You and me both. Kael stood and gathered his equipment. I have reviewed your recovery chart. You are nearing safe mobility thresholds. If you continue this pattern, you will be cleared for full activity within 2 cycles. That fast? You are healing, despite your efforts to the contrary. Garron smiled faintly. Guess your methods are working. Kael tilted his head. They are. But so is your stubbornness. Garron stood carefully, testing his leg. It's a package deal. Kael turned to leave. Do not unwrap it too early. Garron watched him go, then looked around the quiet bay. The plants rustled faintly under the misting nozzles, and the lights dimmed slightly for the rest shift. He sat again, propping his leg up on the same crate. For once, he didn't feel the need to move. No alarms. No ruptures. No dignitaries watching in horror while he bled onto a pipe. Just a quiet room, and the sound of things growing. It would do.